Well, it's me again, and I'm going to talk to you about our new Pico Plus, the premium pico and nanosecond neodymium YAG platform. Now, the first thing I'd like to do is to ask you a question, and I'd like to ask you, is the picosecond laser a magic wand? Because when the picosecond laser first came out a couple of years ago, everybody went, hey, hallelujah, the picosecond laser has arrived. But is it a magic wand? When we think of picosecond technology, we think of the theory which tells us that picosecond domain offer advantages compared to the nanosecond technology. We expect better results, achieved faster. Oops, sorry, let's go back. Better results achieved faster. We want the skin reaction to be more forgiving with less pain and scarring. That patient downtime should be less and there should be fewer, if any, side effects. And that treatment of tattoos and pigmented lesions resistant to nanosecond treatment should be possible with this new picosecond technology. And in practice, of course, this has been proven true, but only to a certain extent. Were we wrong about nanosecond technology? First of all, literature reviews, when we looked, and this one is pretty old. You can see it's a fairly ancient nanosecond technology paper, but it had a good number of patients, and it went from 1 to 10 sessions. Now, when we looked at the lightning achieved, we can see that there was a fair amount achieved with 14 of the patients, 23. But when we look at this one here, this figure here, we can see that 22% were under 50% cleared. So let's move on a little bit now that people understand the nanosecond technology. And this is a very nice study with a huge population, 10 to 15 sessions. And once again, you see that after 10 sessions, we're looking at this amount of clearance. But after 15 sessions, we are still left with a large number of patients who have not been cleared. In other words, for both of these patients with nanosecond technology and many, many treatments, 25% poor pigment clearance. All right. We were not wrong about nanosecond technology, but there is perhaps something better than the Q-switch laser. With the Q-switch laser, we could offer selective photothermolysis, where we selectively target pigment underneath the thermorelaxation time of the target, thereby restricting thermal damage to the target itself. Unfortunately, the cell containing the target was very often damaged or destroyed. So then we fine-tuned that, and we went on with laser toning to subcellular selective photothermolysis, where we were able to target pigments within the cell, within the melanosome, within the melanocyte, melanosomes, and melanin granules within the daughter keratinocytes, but leave the cells alive. And this was a pretty good a very good move forward. But what is better than that? Well, better than that is super selective mechanolysis. Because when we come to the picosecond domain, we find that we have minimal thermal damage, that we have super selective non-linear athermal and photomechanical pigment destruction. Non-linear means simply that you can put in as much power as you like and you won't see any rise in temperature. That's the linear side of it. And this is achieved without any damage to the cell. So instead of looking at the thermal relaxation time of our targets, we look at the stress relaxation time. And that's the huge difference between the pico domain and the nanosecond domain. So we look at papers that appeared when picosecond started to come out. And the interesting thing you see is that we get great clearance by a few number of treatments. Sorry, beg your pardon, this is a very sensitive little thingy, right? But you can see that there is 75% on all of these. There is still 25 or so percent not cleared. But look at the number of treatments. If you give more treatments, then you're going to get more clearance, because pico does not work in the same way as nano. However, it is not the magic wand. So in theory, we look at the nanosecond and we look at picosecond in targets, and this is what you're left with, the nanosecond, whereas with the picosecond, it's like sand instead of gravel. And this means that the macrophages have got a much easier target to remove and then shift out through the lymphatic system and excrete from the body. Okay. So nano versus pico, we did some experimentation. We created a tissue phantom, which is a polyacromide hydrogel with bovine serum, and into a tissue block, like you see here. Then we put some tattoo ink injected into this tissue block, removing the syringe to leave this phantom with a line of tattoo ink inside this skin-like phantom. So we then bombard it with, first of all, nano, and this is the result with a 4 millimeter spot, 4.8 joules per square centimeter, and one spot. You can see that the pigments have been blasted apart. But then when we look at 750 picoseconds, we can see with the same 4 millimeters, 4.8 joules, and one pass, there's much more disruption of these small ink particles. So let's look at what happens with multiple passes, because I talked about multiple passes before. Here we have again 5 nanoseconds, and here we have a number of passes, and the same again, 5 passes. And then we pass again, and there's not much difference with the nanosecond. But when we look at the picosecond, we can see that there's tremendous difference in dispersion of these ink particles. Then let's look at a little model for a recalcitrant tattoo. So first of all, it's the same tattoo phantom. This is 5 nanoseconds with 5 nanoseconds repeated. You can see that there's still a lot of particles left, even though you've hit it with 2 lots of passes using the 5 nanoseconds. When we take the same 5 nanoseconds and we treat it with the 750 pico, you can see that it's almost all the ink particles have been blasted apart by this photomechanical rather than photothermal reaction. So that's quite a nice model for a recalcitrant tattoo. Most picoseconds have only 2 wavelengths. Some have 3, none except pico plus has 4. Now, why do we need these wavelengths? Well, here's a typically multicolored tattoo with some green and some red bordered with black. And this is treated by Kevin Dupelchain in New York, one of our KOLs in the States. And after 2 nanosecond treatments, you can see very, very good clearance of the black part of the tattoo, but you can see some ghosting of the green and the red. He treated this again 10 times, and it didn't change. So this is where multiple wavelengths come in, because we have to remember that picosecond is still not colorblind. We need to get down to very low pico levels, like 50 picoseconds, before we get true color blindness. So this is why we still need a little bit of pigment selectivity with pico. So we add, instead of the 532 and the 1064, we add 595 yellow and 660 red. Why? Well, because we can take the red to attack the green, and we can take the yellow to attack the red and get rid of these pigments. So let's look at a little theoretical drawing here. This is with the nanosecond, and you find that there are still pigment particles which have not been dealt with. But when we deal with them with the picosecond, again, in theory, with the 4 different wavelengths, we can remove all of these recalcitrant pigments, including the black recalcitrant pigment that you saw in the tissue phantom model. Picosecond lasers are effective, but you want them to be cost effective, not just effective. And in order to be cost effective, the picosecond laser needs more wavelengths. Why? Well, multicolored tattoos. So you can add the 595 and the 660. Because we have vascular mediated conditions. We have post-acne redness. We have rosacea. We have melasma. And now many, many more cases of melasma, when you examine with a dermoscope, have got a vascular plexus in the dermis which is hyperactive. And this is where the 595 comes in very handy. And then we have safer treatment of discrete epidermal tattoos, like, for example, freckles. Because here again you have very high absorption in melanin, but very, very low absorption, or comparatively lower absorption in blood at 660 nanometers. So it removes blood as a completing chromophore and gives a much gentle treatment to the epidermis compared with the 532. This is another very early paper by one of the leaders in the field, Victor Ross, and it compared side by side nano and pico lasers for tattoo removal. They came to some very interesting findings. They found that when it was in the side-by-side comparison, the higher nanoseconds were much, much more effective than the high picoseconds. So when we look and break down what they were doing with the nanosecond, it was 10 nanoseconds using 8 joules per square centimeter, and that gives 800 milliwatts per square centimeter of power density. When we look at the nanosecond domain, this is a true nanosecond laser. It was 35 nanoseconds. It was a semi-experimental model. And at 0.65 joules per square centimeter, that produced 18 gigawatts per square centimeter. But it still did not produce as much of an effect as Victor Ross and his team wanted. And he concluded that ideally, they would have liked to have treated resistant tattoos with high energy picosecond laser. And the big problem is that most existing picosecond lasers don't offer high enough energy. They have lower pulse energies. And this is where you need higher pulse energies, because you want more effective removal of pigment than the existing Q-switch nanosecond domain systems. So this lets me introduce our Pico Plus, right? Breaking the barriers to improve your current output with this picosecond domain. So typically it looks very pretty, like all our stuff does. Everything is as usual. The power switch thing, blah, blah, blah. And this is the very nice little thing here with built-in storage, so that all your handpieces are kept there handy, and you can also keep your sandwiches in there for your break. The foot switch, of course, is the foot switch, right? And that's not particularly special. But what is special, of course, is that it's set apart from the major competitors because it has 4 wavelengths: 1064, 532, 595, and 660. Secondly, it has the highest fluencies of any picosecond laser on the market. And it has the greatest range of settings than any picosecond in the market. Now, why is this important? Because we're talking picosecond. And picosecond to nanosecond, you're talking of 3 orders of magnitude, 100,000 times of a difference. So you want to be able to fine-tune your settings. So when we look at the range of settings, first of all, this is taken from the literature. These are the range of settings available from competitor systems. This is the range of settings available from PicoPlus. Now you can imagine trying to go up and down these settings with the up and down buttons. You would get severe fatigue of your finger going right? Because you want to go from up there to down there. So that's why instead of having the up and down button, we have this jog and shuttle setting device on the GUI. So you can quite simply move from maximum to minimum, and you can move delicately from setting to setting. Now, highest fluencies are very good, but we've also got to consider lowest fluencies, particularly at 532. Because 532 is going to blast the epidermis apart if you're not careful. So this is why the low settings are important. This is the range of settings from a competitor system. You can see it goes from there to there in quite reasonable steps. But then when we look at Pico, that yellow highlight is the same as the competitor system. Everything to the left for the lower fluencies and everything to the right for the higher fluencies is reached with the lowest divisions of 0.01 of a joule per square centimeter. So you can tune very, very carefully your treatment individually to each patient and to each condition that you're treating. We have a number of handpieces. We have the zoom handpiece, which is, as the name suggests, a zoom. It's not collimated. It has to be used in contact with the tissue. We have the picotoning collimated handpiece, and as the name suggests, it's collimated. You don't have to keep it at any particular distance, although we like to say within 1 to 1.5 centimeters of the tissue. We have the Ruby touch, which is the 660, Ruby standing for ruby-like versatile YAG, and it is auto-recognized as the handpiece. You have to tap in the spot size. For the other two, the spot size is also auto-recognized by the system. Then we have the gold toning handpiece with two different spot sizes, which are changed by changing the tip. And once again, the handpiece is auto-recognized, but you have to tap in which size you're using. And finally, we have this very interesting handpiece, the focused dots handpiece. Right? So let's take a little look at this handpiece. It's 1064 nanometers only. It is 7.4 by 7.4 nanometers, and it's 9 by 9 spots. So it's a semi-fractionated handpiece. It doesn't fractionate by scanning, it fractionates by diffusion. So all of these spots appear boom at once, right? And each of these spots is 100 microns in diameter. It's auto-detected, and we don't need to detect the spot size because it's at 100 microns per microbeam. So what are the clinical applications? Well, we can use this for gentle resurfacing. We can use it for toning, the gold rejuvenation, skin rejuvenation. We can use it for fine wrinkles, and we can use it for minor scars. So how does it work? Well, it's in contact, and instead of focusing at the surface of the tissue, it focuses the beam into the tissue. And in doing so, with the picosecond pulse, we get these photoacoustic waves, and this produces acoustic layers in the tissue which develop LIOBs, right? Laser-induced optical breakdowns in the tissue. And if we look at it in experimental, this is in a jello, very high technical jello model, and this is with a single pass, and this is with multiple passes, and you can see that the surface remains comparatively unharmed. Now it bulges up here because this is jello, and as the impacts go into the jello, it forces them up. However, when we use the skin phantom model, you do not see the same rising phenomenon in the surface, but you do see everything is situated underneath the surface of the tissue. If you can imagine, the epidermis is here, and this is down in the dermis, which is ideal for cold rejuvenation. No anesthesia is required. So that's the focus dots handpiece. Focus toning, we get our laser-induced optical breakdowns in the dermis and no damage to the epidermis with no cooling required. So here's some clinical examples. This is acne scars with the focus dot after 2, 3, and 4 treatments, 1 week apart, and just look at them closely. It's not as wonderful as either Echo 2 or Infini, but it's a very, very nice result considering there's no anesthesia required and there's absolutely no downtime. Another example, baseline, treating at weekly intervals after the 4th treatment. So you can see this deals very nicely with both rolling and boxcar type scars without any anesthesia, without any damage to the epidermis. Tattoo treatment, right? Well, here's what the skin reaction looks like on one tattoo with nano and pico. And you can see the surrounding erythema with the nano is much greater than it is with the pico. Treatment-resistant tattoo, this was after 10 sessions with nanosecond domain. This was after the first pico, after the second pico, and after the third pico plus session. And it has dealt with these recalcitrant and resistant pigments very, very nicely without any pigmentary or textural changes to the skin. Solar lentiginase. This was treated with a larger spot size, first of all a smaller spot size, and then with a larger spot size in the same session. And this was the result after 1 session, 6 weeks. Now it has partially cleared, but this is Asian skin, and there's no PIH using 532. Why? Well, here's 532 with a nanosecond domain, and you can see quite clearly at the dermo-epidermal junction there's a lot of vacuolization, and that will lead to inflammation, which will lead to post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation. But when we look at the picture with the pico, 750 picoseconds, you can see these LIOBS, the LIOBs, the laser-induced optical breakdowns. And these are perfectly harmless. They will disappear as the skin tightens up. But all the pigmentation has gone, and the dermo-epidermal junction is unharmed. So, abnorm with slight textural change. Abnormal nevus of like macules. This was treated with a pico, focused handpiece, followed by toning with the collimated handpiece. Very nice result. And here we have an example of pale freckles, and this was treated with the 660, 2 millimeters, 1.2 joules per square centimeter, after 3 days, after 6 days, and after 14 days. Very nice result with only 1 treatment, and this is not with the 532. This is where the 660 comes into its own for a gentle removal of well-circumscribed epidermal lesions. So the comments from our 2 major KOLs in Korea are that it's really optimum for common pigmented lesions, particularly in the Asian skin, and they liked the lowest fluencies available for the 532. The zoom collimated handpiece they liked for melasma, nevus of Ota, and also for abnom. The picosecond wavelength is now available with the 4 wavelengths, which they like, and the focus dot handpiece really intrigued them because they'd never come across this with a 1064 nanometer laser before, and they felt it was a very reasonable price. So, the clinician is the magician. And if you remember the Harry Potter film, when Potter went into the wand shop with Ollivander, Ollivander said, "Ah, Mr. Potter, it is the wand that chooses the wizard. But you are the wizards, and you must choose your wand and use it properly with science behind it. And I think the Pico Plus will help you to do that with some things that you cannot do with the nanosecond domain laser. Thank you very much indeed for your kind attention.